Relations between Iran and the United States have largely been hostile since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. During that upheaval, some revolutionaries declared that the American embassy was not truly a diplomatic mission but rather a CIA hub, a center of espionage where plots were allegedly being devised against the Iranian people.
چرا ملت ایران میگن مرگ بر آمریکا؟ اولا بنده این رو برای حضرات بزرگان آمریکایی روشن کنم. مرگ بر آمریکا.
Yet the roots of tension between the two nations stretch back much further. In 1952, Time magazine selected Iran's Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, as its 1951 Man of the Year, in recognition of his push to nationalize Iran's oil resources, despite growing economic pressure from Britain. Mossadegh, Iran's 35th Prime Minister, accomplished what no previous Iranian leader had managed. He challenged British dominance in his country and disrupted the Royal Navy's secure access to Iranian oil supplies. However, the United States stands as the most dominant global superpower, home to a population exceeding 320 million people. Iran, meanwhile, is itself a significant regional power with more than 80 million citizens. Together, these two nations account for roughly 4% and 1% of the world's living population, respectively. Yet despite their size and influence, they have maintained absolutely no formal diplomatic ties for the past 41 years and have, on multiple occasions, edged dangerously close to outright war. At the start of 2020, open conflict between Washington and Tehran appeared almost unavoidable. The United States carried out a drone strike that killed a senior Iranian major general, and Iran responded by launching artillery and missile strikes against American military installations in Iraq. Had these escalating actions spiraled further, the resulting war might have become the largest global conflict since the end of the Second World War. Fortunately, that scenario was averted. However, to understand how both countries came so close to such a confrontation and why a similar crisis could erupt again, it is necessary to examine the full historical trajectory of tensions between America and Iran. That history stretches back to the period before the outbreak of the World War II. To understand the importance of this moment in Iran's history and how it shaped the country's future and its relationship with Washington, it is necessary to look back to the early 20th century, when Iran was still known as Persia. Like many countries in the region, Iran's oil wealth came under foreign oversight soon after its discovery in 1901. The British government encouraged entrepreneur William Knox D'Arcy to invest in Persia's oil industry. British officials arranged an agreement between D'Arcy and the reigning monarch, Mozaffar al-Din Shah Qajar. Under the 60-year concession, D'Arcy received the exclusive right to explore, extract, transport, and sell petroleum, natural gas, asphalt, and certain minerals across 3/4 of the country. In exchange, the Shah was paid £20,000 in cash, another £20,000 in company shares, and Iran was promised just 16% of the profits. Historically, this D'Arcy concession has been viewed as a deal that severely limited Iran's ability to benefit from its own oil wealth for decades. In 1908, a major oil field was discovered in Masjed Soleiman in southwestern Iran, at the time the largest oil find in the world. This discovery triggered extensive exploration that would reshape the region's future. The British government subsequently acquired control of the D'Arcy concession and established the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which in 1954 became British Petroleum, BP. As oil began replacing coal as the dominant fuel for navies and economies, Iranian oil proved crucial to Britain, especially during the World War I. Winston Churchill, who had helped secure the government's stake in the oil venture, described the acquisition of Iranian oil as an extraordinary stroke of fortune. For roughly half a century, Iran's vast oil reserves remained under British control, until Mossadegh rose to power. After the World War II, the authority of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi weakened as nationalist voices gained strength in the Iranian parliament. In March 1951, Prime Minister Haj Ali Razmara was assassinated by a supporter of oil nationalization. Soon afterward, nationalist members of parliament nominated Mossadegh as prime minister. Alarmed by the growing nationalist movement, the Shah approved the nomination. In May 1951, Parliament voted to nationalize the oil industry. celebrating this achievement, Mossadegh declared in a well-known speech that years of negotiations with foreign powers had produced no meaningful results. He argued that oil revenues could cover Iran's entire national budget and help fight poverty, disease, and underdevelopment. The nationalization of Iranian oil dealt a severe blow to British economic interests and threatened the strength of the British Empire. The massive refinery at Abadan stood as clear evidence of Britain's long investment. Built with British expertise and funding, it was now evacuated under humiliating circumstances. Britain responded by bringing the dispute before the International Court of Justice and imposing an embargo on Iranian oil exports, effectively preventing Iran from selling its newly nationalized oil on global markets. British officials hoped that economic strain would erode Mossadegh's popularity and remove him from office. Nevertheless, Mossadegh refused settlement proposals. Determined to regain control of Iran's oil industry, Britain approached the United States to help organize a coup against Mossadegh. The administration of Harry S. Truman rejected the proposal in 1952. However, after Dwight D. Eisenhower assumed office in 1953, British officials persuaded him, warning that Mossadegh had ties to communist groups. Street protests and unrest followed in Tehran. Initial efforts to remove Mossadegh failed, but British and American intelligence services ultimately succeeded by backing royalist forces loyal to the exiled Shah. Iran became divided between supporters of the Shah and nationalist factions. Pro-Shah demonstrators flooded Tehran streets, attacking pro-Mossadegh newspapers. General Fazlallah Zahidi surrounded Mossadegh's residence with tanks as clashes broke out. Eventually, Mossadegh and his cabinet surrendered, and Zahidi became prime minister. The United States then reinstated Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, restoring a pro-Western monarchy. This marked the first major foreign operation conducted by the newly created Central Intelligence Agency, working alongside Britain's MI6. Together, they toppled Iran's first democratically elected government, a turning point that continues to shape Iranian-American relations. Mossadegh was tried for treason in a military court in Tehran. He received a 3-year prison sentence and was later placed under house arrest until his death. His family was compelled to bury him at his residence. The coup transformed Iran from a constitutional monarchy into an authoritarian royal regime, fueling public resentment toward the United States. In 2000, U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright publicly acknowledged America's role in the 1953 coup, describing it as a setback for Iran's political development and recognizing why many Iranians remained resentful of foreign interference. After the coup, control of oil returned to British influence, and the United States increasingly backed the Shah. In 2013, Iran's parliament approved legislation to sue the U.S. for its role in the 1953 events, following the release of declassified CIA documents detailing how the coup had been executed as a matter of U.S. foreign policy. The operation aimed to remove Mossadegh through legal or semi-legal means and replace his government with a pro-Western administration under the Shah, with Zahidi as prime minister. In 1957, Washington assisted the Shah in creating the feared secret police force known as SAVAK. This organization monitored political opponents both inside Iran and abroad. Many Iranians were subjected to torture, and SAVAK agents received interrogation training from the CIA. Despite growing public anger over repression and foreign interference, the alliance between the Shah and the United States continued. In December 1977, during an extravagant New Year's visit to Tehran, U.S. President Jimmy Carter praised Iran as an island of stability due to the Shah's leadership. Yet just over a year later, mounting opposition led to the Shah's overthrow. Religious leader Ayatollah Khomeini, who had spent 15 years in exile, returned to Iran and became a central figure in the revolution. His return signaled the start of more than 4 decades of deep hostility between Tehran and Washington. Since 1984, the United States has officially designated Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism. Although periods of negotiation occasionally reduced tensions, shifting administrations and Iran's involvement in regional proxy conflicts repeatedly reignited disputes. Tensions intensified further after the administration of Donald Trump withdrew from the 2015 nuclear agreement in 2018 and launched a maximum pressure campaign designed to weaken Iran's economy and curb its nuclear and regional ambitions. Tehran responded with what it called a strategy of maximum resistance, demonstrating its ability to threaten U.S. interests in the region. In January 2020, the United States killed Qasem Soleimani, commander of the Quds Force of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. His leadership had expanded Iran's military influence, particularly in Syria. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani compared Soleimani's killing to the 1953 coup and to the downing of an Iranian passenger airliner in the Persian Gulf, calling it an unforgettable crime. President Trump argued that eliminating Soleimani saved American lives. However, for many Iranians mourning his death, Soleimani, like Mossadegh before him, was viewed as a national figure removed by the United States, reinforcing a long narrative of foreign intervention in Iran's affairs. In the early years of the 20th century, British prospectors discovered oil beneath Iran's deserts. Continued exploration revealed that Iran possessed the fourth largest proven oil reserves in the world, marking the country as a vast and previously unrealized energy powerhouse. For Britain, the challenge was obvious. These enormous oil deposits were located inside Iran, a nation that was not formally part of the sprawling British Empire, which already controlled roughly a quarter of the globe. Undeterred, Britain negotiated an agreement with Iran to share in the profits from oil extraction. This arrangement led to the creation of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. However, the structure of this partnership was deeply unequal. Although the oil fields were entirely within Iranian territory, Iran was granted only 16% of the company's profits, while Britain claimed the remaining 84%. By the beginning of the Second World War, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company controlled all of Iran's oil production and had grown into the largest enterprise within the British Empire. Yet this enormously valuable asset faced mounting threats. Inside Iran, resentment over the inequitable oil arrangement intensified. At the same time, global geopolitical tensions were escalating. In 1941, Nazi Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union, opening what would become the largest continuous frontline in human history. Iran occupied a strategically critical location along the Soviet Union's southern border. Although Iran declared neutrality at the start of the war, its ruling monarch, the Shah, was viewed by both Britain and the Soviet Union as being overly sympathetic to Nazi Germany. If Iran had aligned itself with the Axis powers, it could have opened a southern front against the Soviets, diverting critical troops from the Eastern Front. Such cooperation might also have endangered Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus region and placed Britain's largest oil company at risk of falling under Nazi control. To prevent these possibilities and to secure a reliable supply route for delivering vital materials to the Soviet Union, Britain and the Soviet Union jointly invaded neutral Iran. Vastly outmatched in numbers and technology, Iranian forces were defeated within a week. The reigning Shah was removed from power and replaced by his 21-year-old son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, whom the Allies believed would be more compliant with their interests. Throughout the war, Iran remained under effective Allied occupation. More than 30,000 American personnel were eventually stationed there, and nearly one-third of all American supplies sent to the Soviet Union passed through Iranian territory. Once the war ended, Allied forces withdrew. However, the controversial oil arrangement with Britain soon resurfaced as a major issue. By the early 1950s, Britain continued to collect the overwhelming majority of Iran's oil revenue. Meanwhile, Iranian oil workers and their families endured harsh living conditions. Britain also refused to grant Iran access to the company's financial records and rejected repeated demands for independent audits. Public support within Iran for nationalizing the oil industry grew dramatically. In 1951, Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, with unanimous backing from parliament, moved to nationalize the oil industry. Britain retaliated by imposing a total embargo on Iranian oil. 2 years later, in 1953, Britain's MI6 and America's CIA orchestrated a military coup to remove Mossadegh from power. Approximately 300 Iranians were killed during the upheaval. Mossadegh was placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life, and the Shah was restored with greatly expanded authority, effectively becoming an authoritarian ruler whose position had now been secured twice by Western intervention. Within Iran, the Shah increasingly came to be viewed as a puppet of foreign powers. As the Cold War emerged from the aftermath of the Second World War, Iran's strategic position along the Soviet Union's southern flank, its immense oil reserves, and its pro-Western monarch made it a natural ally of the United States. For the first time, Iran became a key American partner. The Shah adopted strongly pro-American and pro-Israeli foreign policies, and for decades Iran ranked among Washington's most important Cold War allies in the Middle East. However, his domestic policies gradually eroded his support at home. He established an extensive secret police network that arrested thousands of political opponents, while many others, including prominent clerics, were forced into exile. Reports of widespread torture of dissidents in prison became common. The Iranian Communist Party was banned. The Shah maintained friendly relations with both the United States and Israel at a time when most of the Islamic world refused to recognize Israel. Domestically, he promoted modernization, secular reforms, and expanded rights for women. These measures alienated multiple segments of Iranian society: leftist groups, laborers, traditional Shiite Muslim conservatives, and influential religious leaders. By the late 1970s, long-standing unrest escalated into full-scale revolution. A movie theater in Abadan was set ablaze, killing at least 420 people. The Shah's government blamed Marxist and Islamist militants, while many demonstrators suspected the regime's own secret police. The following month, protesters assembled in Tehran's central square, and government forces opened fire, killing and injuring hundreds more. More than 5 million Iranians eventually took to the streets demanding the Shah's resignation. As defections spread throughout the armed forces, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi recognized that his position was untenable. In early 1979, he fled the country into exile. The revolutionary government that replaced him swiftly abolished the monarchy and invited Ruhollah Khomeini to return after 15 years in exile to assume leadership as supreme leader. Thus, the modern Islamic Republic of Iran was established. This new regime differed fundamentally from its predecessor. It was a Shiite theocracy openly hostile to both the United States and Israel. Mass executions and purges of former officials and political opponents followed almost immediately. To the United States and much of the international community, Iran's Islamic Revolution was a profound shock. Almost overnight, a cornerstone American ally in the Middle East had transformed into one of its most determined adversaries. After the Shah's departure, the United States allowed him entry for cancer treatment. Iran's new leadership demanded his extradition to face trial for alleged crimes committed during his rule. Aware that extradition would almost certainly result in his execution, Washington refused. Given the history of Western-backed coups in Iran, suspicion grew among Iranian revolutionaries that the CIA might attempt yet another intervention, possibly operating from the American embassy in Tehran. In November 1979, thousands of Iranian students and revolutionaries stormed the U.S. embassy and seized 52 American diplomats and civilians as hostages. The United States eventually arranged for the Shah to travel to Egypt, while President Jimmy Carter's administration pursued negotiations for the hostages' release. When diplomacy stalled, Carter authorized a military rescue mission in April 1980. The operation, codenamed Operation Eagle Claw, ended in catastrophe when a helicopter collided with a transport aircraft before any engagement with Iranian forces occurred. 8 American servicemen were killed, and the mission was aborted. The hostages remained captive. Following this failure, the United States severed diplomatic relations with Iran, a rupture that has persisted ever since. Soon afterward, another dramatic development unfolded. In September 1980, Saddam Hussein launched a full-scale invasion of Iran. For years, Saddam had sought to position Iraq as the dominant power in the oil-rich Persian Gulf but had been deterred by Iran's stronger military and its Western backing. Now, with Iran destabilized by revolution, purges, and international isolation, Saddam judged the moment opportune. Expecting a swift triumph, Iraq instead became entangled in an 8-year conflict resembling the trench warfare of World War I. In the midst of this invasion, Iran reconsidered the hostage crisis and ultimately agreed to release all 52 Americans after 444 days in captivity. The United States responded with severe economic sanctions against Iran and provided substantial support to Iraq in hopes of further weakening the Iranian regime. The Iran-Iraq War became one of the deadliest conflicts of the latter half of the 20th century. Up to 400,000 Iranians lost their lives along the front lines. The war was marked by Iraq's extensive use of chemical weapons and landmines, as well as continued American support for Saddam Hussein's government with conventional military supplies. During the course of the war, the United States maintained that Hezbollah, a Shia Islamist militant group based in Lebanon and widely regarded as being backed by Iran, was responsible for carrying out numerous anti-American terrorist attacks throughout the region. In 1983, the group bombed the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, killing 17 Americans. Later that same year, they executed a massive truck bombing targeting the barracks of a military compound in Lebanon, an attack that claimed the lives of 241 American service members and 58 French soldiers. These incidents, along with other acts of violence, played a significant role in the United States officially designating Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism in 1984. By April 1988, the Iran-Iraq War was still ongoing. In an effort to counter the Iraqi Navy, Iran had laid extensive minefields across large areas of the Persian Gulf. An American frigate passing through the region struck one of these mines, suffering severe damage and nearly sinking, though fortunately no lives were lost. Despite the absence of casualties, the United States chose to respond militarily. It launched Operation Praying Mantis, the largest American naval combat operation since the Second World War. 2 U.S. surface action groups conducted coordinated assaults that destroyed 2 Iranian offshore oil platforms and sank 6 Iranian warships. The operation either destroyed or heavily damaged roughly half of Iran's naval fleet, resulted in the deaths of 56 Iranians, and led to just 2 American fatalities. Only 3 months later, in July 1988, tensions flared again. An American cruiser inadvertently entered Iranian territorial waters and received warning fire from Iranian speedboats. At the same time, Iran Air Flight 655 was following its routine commercial route from Tehran to Dubai, flying over Iranian airspace above the Strait of Hormuz. The American warship mistakenly identified the civilian airliner as an Iranian fighter jet. Believing they might be under imminent threat, the crew launched a missile that struck and completely destroyed the aircraft. All 290 passengers and crew members aboard were killed, including 24 Iranians. It became the deadliest aviation shootdown in history until the destruction of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 over Ukraine more than 25 years later. These deadly confrontations deepened hostility between Washington and Tehran, with each side convinced the other had inflicted severe and unjustified harm. In 1995, under the administration of Bill Clinton, the United States imposed a comprehensive trade embargo on Iran, banning virtually all transactions between American companies and the Iranian state, effectively ending bilateral trade. In 1996, Hezbollah, again described as operating with Iranian backing, carried out another bombing targeting U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia. This attack killed 19 American Air Force personnel and injured nearly 500 others. 5 years later came the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. Just 4 months after September 11, U.S. President George W. Bush delivered his Axis of Evil speech, grouping Iran together with Saddam Hussein's Iraq and North Korea as regimes allegedly conspiring against the United States. Slightly more than a year after that speech, the U.S. invaded Iraq, citing claims that Saddam possessed weapons of mass destruction. His government collapsed in roughly a month, yet no such weapons were ever found. The message to both Iran and North Korea appeared unmistakable: either acquire nuclear weapons as a deterrent or risk becoming the next target. North Korea successfully tested a nuclear device just 3 years after the American-led invasion of Iraq. Iran, meanwhile, accelerated its own nuclear research efforts. However, the United States repeatedly declared that a nuclear-armed Iran would be unacceptable. For years, Washington relied on a combination of economic sanctions and diplomatic negotiations to pressure Tehran into halting its nuclear ambitions. By 2015, under President Barack Obama, negotiations resulted in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, widely known as the Iran nuclear deal. Although the agreement's details were complex, the essence was that the United States and other powers agreed to lift many sanctions previously imposed on Iran, while Iran committed to limiting its nuclear program and permitting regular international inspections. For a time, relations between the two countries showed tentative signs of improvement. That progress proved short-lived. In 2016, Donald Trump was elected President of the United States after campaigning on a pledge to withdraw from the nuclear agreement and reinstate tougher sanctions. In 2018, he fulfilled that promise, pulling the U.S. out of the deal. Iran responded with threats to resume its nuclear program and even to close the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping if tensions escalated further, an action that could have severely disrupted the global oil market. Relations once again deteriorated. In May and June 2019, multiple commercial vessels traveling through the Persian Gulf were damaged in two separate attacks. Western governments blamed Iran, while Tehran denied involvement. In June, Iran shot down an American drone operating near the Strait of Hormuz, further inflaming tensions. The following month, British authorities seized an Iranian oil tanker near the Strait of Gibraltar, alleging it was transporting oil to the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria in violation of European Union sanctions. Iran retaliated by capturing a British-flagged tanker in the Persian Gulf and detaining its crew. Eventually, both sides released the vessels and their crews, but the standoff underscored how close the situation was to spiraling out of control. Tensions escalated dramatically at the end of 2019. On December 27th, a rocket attack struck the K-1 military base in Iraq, killing an American civilian contractor and injuring 4 U.S. service members. The United States blamed Hezbollah and other Iran-backed Shiite militias, though both Iran and Hezbollah denied responsibility. At the time, around 5,000 American troops were stationed in Iraq to assist in the fight against ISIL. 2 days later, on December 29th, the United States launched airstrikes on Hezbollah weapons depots and command centers in Iraq and Syria. The strikes killed 25 militia fighters and wounded nearly 60 more, further escalating the confrontation. On December 31st, Iran-backed militia members stormed and vandalized the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. While no fatalities occurred, Washington once again accused Iran of orchestrating the provocation. Then, on January 3, 2020, tensions reached unprecedented levels. Qasem Soleimani, a senior Iranian commander widely considered one of the most powerful figures in Iran, arrived in Baghdad for meetings with Iraqi officials. As his convoy left the airport, a U.S. drone fired missiles that destroyed the vehicles, killing Soleimani and 9 others. The strike had been personally authorized by President Donald Trump. It marked the first time since the 1943 killing of Isoroku Yamamoto that the United States had deliberately targeted and killed a senior military leader of a major foreign power. 2 days later, Iran declared it would no longer abide by the restrictions of the 2015 nuclear agreement and demanded that U.S. forces withdraw from Iraq. On January 8th, Iran launched retaliatory ballistic missile strikes against 2 U.S. military bases in Iraq under the codename Operation Martyr Soleimani. The world watched anxiously as the two countries appeared closer than ever to full-scale war. Although the bases suffered substantial structural damage, no American personnel were killed. This absence of casualties allowed both governments to step back without losing face. Iran demonstrated resolve by striking U.S. positions, while the lack of American deaths gave Washington the option to refrain from further retaliation, which it chose to do. Tragically, however, disaster struck again. Fearing a possible U.S. counterattack, Iranian air defense systems were on high alert. One missile battery mistakenly identified what operators believed was an incoming American cruise missile. In reality, it was a civilian aircraft, Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752, that had just departed Tehran en route to Kiev with 176 people aboard. Iranian surface-to-air missiles shot the plane down, killing everyone on board, including 82 Iranians and 63 Canadians. Initially, Iranian authorities denied responsibility and attributed the crash to technical malfunction. After days of mounting evidence and international pressure, the government admitted on January 11 that it had mistakenly shot down the aircraft. The attempted cover-up sparked widespread protests within Iran. In early 2020, the United States and Iran had come perilously close to open war. Hundreds of innocent lives were lost as a result of the escalating confrontation. Yet the conflict might have become far more devastating had events unfolded differently, potentially leading to a full-scale war with far greater loss of life.